Hello, my name is Alex Brotman, and I'm a co-chair with the Data and Identity Protection Committee within MAAWG. I'd like to welcome you today to our seventh episode of MAAWG 5, where we're going to talk about some of the latest anti-abuse efforts and developments from across the online ecosystem. Today, I'd like to introduce Herb Royblot from Mimecast. And he actually, if you attended the last MAAWG, he spoke with us for a little bit, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about him. He's a principal data scientist for Mimecast. He lives and works in Ventura, California. He is a former professor at the University of Hawaii, where he worked on dolphin biosonar, cognitive science, and neural networks. He's a former co-founder of 3 companies and the author of Algorithms Are Not Enough from the MIT Press. Welcome, Herb. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that we're going to do today, I guess, as we go through this, we're going to talk with each other, and we're going to take a deeper look into threat hunting, and where it fits into the future of security. So I'm going to ask you some few questions, and we'll see how that goes. Sound good?
Good. Sounds good to me.
Okay. Could you give us a description of what threat hunting is and why it might be important to various types of entities?
Yeah, well, we're really good at defending the periphery. We're really good at identifying the signatures of attacking files and blocking them. But there are lots of files that come in. There's lots of attacks that come in where we don't know exactly what the file should look like. The attackers are getting more and more clever at evading our detection. And once they're in, there's some work at identifying the activity of those threats once they're active, but there isn't a whole lot of activity. And I think we need a whole lot more, because things can evade our detection as they come in, and then they're active. And if we don't look for them, we don't know that they're there. So what I argue we need are what I call computational T cells. By analogy to the body, the body has T cells that go in and detect infections, and they attack the infection and neutralize it. We need the same kind of thing that goes on inside our computer networks. Okay. So yeah.
So I guess if you could elaborate a little more, how does threat hunting work?
Okay. When attackers attack, their attack actually has to do something. So ransomware has to actually encrypt the data or hide it somewhere where you can't find it. If they're trying to steal data, the data have to move through the network out to the periphery and get transmitted to the command and control center. These all are activities that leave traces. We can often find them if we do post hoc forensic analysis, but my argument is we have to look prospectively to identify those things as they're coming in. The other part that we might want to do is there are certain parts of an attack that are very hard to conceal in the file that comes in, if it's a file attack. And those parts can be detected even if we don't detect the entire file as something that we know about. So we can look not just at the whole file, but at the parts. We can also look for more obfuscation, because obfuscation is something that is relatively unusual. If we find it where we don't expect it, that's a signal that there's something that we need to take a closer look at.
Okay. Could you, if you're able to, could you discuss with us any interesting discoveries that you've uncovered as a result of threat hunting?
It's not so much a discovery as it is some research that I did looking at adversarial learning. So I had one system that would learn to detect bad URLs from an attack, and then another system that would try to create those URLs in a way that would evade detection. And after a few iterations, the detector got better at detecting the manufactured URLs, even though their statistics matched what you'd find regularly. One of the most interesting things I found in all that is that of the URLs that the generator generated, about half of them were already registered. It's a very crowded space, and the algorithms that they use to generate domain names are are being taxed to come up with something that actually works.
Okay, it's interesting. Are there any cases where threat hunting may not be the ideal method? What are, and I guess to even more so, what are some common mistakes to avoid when trying to utilize this method?
Yeah, I don't know that it's right to say it's not the ideal method. It's always just part of a complete method. I mean, we can't stop trying to detect things at the periphery. If one of us, meaning the community, identifies a threat file and we can identify it by its signature, we can't stop doing that. We have to continue to do that. Most of the threats that we run into, most of the attacks actually can be stopped at the periphery. But as the attackers get more and more clever and more sophisticated and more and have bigger budgets, it's getting harder and harder to rely just on that. So we need things that will look at things we don't know. We need things that will look at things that activity on the network. And there's a lot of noise in all of that. Any reasonable organization already has a lot of traffic going around in their network. And we have to be able to distinguish the ordinary traffic from a weak signal of the attacks traffic. That's hard to do, but it's not impossible.
So it's something like context analysis where you see what your everyday average traffic is, and then if you see a small signal of something that's an outlier, it becomes either part of the signal, and you incorporate that, or it's the outlier and you need to react to that. Does that sort of
Right.
make
And
sense?
it makes perfect sense. And the key there is that you don't just alert somebody, hey, it's happened, because the alerts will be too high. But what that does is it triggers further analysis. And the analysis may be more expensive, it may be more intrusive, um, but it's something you can't do on every packet, for example, that goes through the network. But if you find an anomalous one that you don't expect, you find one machine SSHing to another machine when that doesn't usually happen, well, that's a pretty good clue that more follow-on work needs to be done. Most of it can be automated, and only following the automation do we actually alert the people. Otherwise, we overwhelm everybody with alerts that are useless.
Okay. It's kind of, it's again, it's interesting. Um, so I guess one of the questions I would have is, if an infection, if something is in your network is benign, are they able to be found if it's not creating noise in your signal? If it's
Mhm.
not doing something out of the ordinary, how do you discover those, or can they be found? And if it's benign, is it even dangerous?
Well, if it's truly benign, then it's something we don't want to find, because that's just ordinary activity of the network. If it's an attack that's laying low, so for example, a lot of the attackers know that we use sandboxes to
Hmm.
try to trigger malware. And they can recognize the presence of the sandbox and say, oh, I'm going to behave nicely now while I'm in the sandbox. And then when it gets released, because it didn't do anything bad in the sandbox, then it waits a while and then triggers and goes and does something. We can sometimes detect the uh, the mechanisms that do the decision, am I in a sandbox or not? We can also change our sandboxes. So whatever clues are being used, we can change those clues, put up a kind of a Potemkin village approach and
Hmm.
make everything look like a sandbox. There are several approaches to that. But if it's truly benign forever, then it's not something we need to worry about. The problem is when it's benign and then gets active.
Sure. Okay.
But even still, the time it takes to detect an advanced persistent threat can be months. If all we do is just reduce the time it takes to detect it, that alone would be valuable.
Okay. So you made an analogy to the biology of the body and to T cells. And so I guess sort of one of the I guess not that I'm confused, but the body does that as part of its biology, where a network can't really do that. The IT staff can, but the network itself is not likely to become essentially Skylab self-aware. Skynet, there we go, Skynet, and become self-aware and start taking out these threats. Is that really a good analogy? Is there a, is there a
Well,
better way to perhaps phrase that?
It's not going to become Skynet. I will certainly agree with that. But it can become self-aware in the limited sense of this is normal traffic. And now here's something that's happening that's abnormal and something I need to pay more attention to. It's a statistical learning problem. It's not something that humans necessarily have to always be involved with. If you map out, here's the ordinary traffic, this machine does ordinarily talk to that machine, well, then maybe it'll be hard to find an intruder who goes on that same route. But if they're looking to explore the network, they've got to explore that leaves traces.
Sure. Okay. I guess that makes sense then. Herb, I'd really like to thank you for your time. I thought this was a very interesting topic, and I'm so happy you took the time today. For those of you who tuned in, stay tuned for our next episode of MAAWG 5, and feel free to reach out to us at any time if you'd like to suggest a topic or a guest. Thank you again, Herb. This was great. Good talking
Thanks,
to you.
Alex. Really appreciate it.